Margot Whitehall only wanted to live peacefully on her land, but a wild Apache warrior kidnapped her daughter, believing it would bring peace to the spirit of his deceased sister. He ignored her pleas, seeing them as only part of a world alien to him, and did not know that his ruthless act would lead to a terrible retribution for him. But at that moment, when the clash of two worlds was supposed to end in bloodshed, fate made its unexpected move. This is a story about real pain, wisdom, and forgiveness. Watch it to the end, because the finale is shocking and will teach you wisdom. Don't forget to like and subscribe. To dusty lands of Arizona, scorched by the relentless sun, were merciless to the weak. But for the Whitehall family, Margot, her husband Thomas, and their little daughter Elizabeth, this was their land, their home, their ranch. Standing on the outskirts was an oasis of hard work and peace. Margot, a woman with a worn but bright face, was preparing dinner over an open fire, while Thomas was checking the corral. 10-year-old Elizabeth was playing with a tattered rag doll, humming a quiet tune her mother once sang to her. Suddenly, the horizon trembled from a cloud of dust. A horseman. His silhouette was blurry, but his pace was confident and fast. Thomas immediately grabbed his rifle. "Margot, get in the house," he commanded, but it was already too late. The horseman stopped his horse right in front of their yard, jumping to the ground with the grace of a predator. It was an Apache warrior named Sunhawk. His skin, tanned by the winds, gleamed under the last rays of the sun, and a cold fire burned in his eyes. He was tall, muscular, with hair as black as a raven's wing, braided into a queue. He wore a necklace of grizzly bear claws and leather pants stained with road dust. Sunhawk silently walked past to stun Thomas, ignoring his threatening posture, and stopped in front of Margot. He spoke in broken English that sounded like the scraping of stones. "My sister died because of your white man. Her land. You build on it." Margot did not understand what he was talking about, but fear pierced her to the bone. "We bought this land from the government," she tried to explain, but her voice trembled. "We are peaceful people." Sunhawk shook his head. "Your loss. Not for my land. My sister. Her spirit cannot find peace." He pointed to the cabin they had built, and then to Elizabeth. "She is the price for the soul. As long as she is gone, my sister's spirit will not be at peace." "No!" Margot screamed, rushing to her daughter. Thomas fired into the air, trying to scare the warrior away. The bullet whistled past his ear, but Sunhawk didn't even flinch. He moved faster than the wind. Margot felt her body go limp from his powerful blow. She fell to the ground, and the warrior, grabbing Elizabeth, jumped onto his horse. "I will return her when my sister's pain subsides," he said, and his voice was as cold as the morning wind in the canyon. Thomas tried to get up, but Sunhawk pulled out a knife and with incredible speed drew the blade across Margot's leg. The blood immediately stained her light dress, leaving dark, dirty spots. "I beg you, stop," she screamed, but her pleas were ignored. The pain was unbearable, but the pain in her heart was even stronger. She saw her daughter, Elizabeth, looking at her in horror, and then at the warrior. Her eyes were full of tears, and her face was stained with dirt. "Mom!" she screamed as she was carried away into the sunset. Thomas, clutching the rifle in his hand, fell to his knees next to Margot. In his eyes there was not just fear, but rage. Rage from his own powerlessness. "I'll find him, and I'll kill him," he whispered, looking at the dark dot that was disappearing beyond the horizon. Margot sobbed, pressing her hand to the wound, but her mind was clouded by only one thing: how to get her daughter back. Word of what happened quickly spread through the small town. People who considered themselves peaceful suddenly became inflamed with righteous anger. They saw no reason for this attack. To them, he was just a wild barbarian who stole a child. No one knew that Sunhawk lost his sister because her land was taken away. He watched her wither, losing her connection with the spirits of her ancestors. He came for justice, but his methods were incomprehensible because they did not conform to their laws. In fact, he was not just a savage, but a man whose life was destroyed by the invasion of another civilization. Margot, despite her wound, felt her anger grow, poisoning her pain. She knew her husband, Thomas, would not stop until he had his revenge. "He's not a wild animal, Margot. He's a man, and he'll be punished by law," Sheriff Stevens said, trying to calm her down. But for Margot, it wasn't just revenge. It was her daughter, Elizabeth, and for her, she was ready for anything. She looked at the bloodstain on her dress, and it seemed to her a symbol of not only her pain, but also her determination. Anger clouded all other feelings, and there was only one thought left in her heart: find her daughter. Margot, despite the deep wound and the pain caused by the loss of her daughter, could not stay put. While Sheriff Stevens and his men were organizing a chase, she felt anger and determination burn inside her. She was not just a mother mourning a loss, but a woman of the Wild West, hardened by hardship. Her husband, Thomas, had always been her rock, her support, but now he was broken. He sat, clutching an old rifle, his gaze empty. "I couldn't protect her, Margot," he repeated, and those words were sharper than any knife. Meanwhile, Sun Hawk was riding north, to the mountains where his tribe had found temporary refuge. In his arms, the girl, Elizabeth, was crying. Her small face was wet with tears, and her frightened eyes did not leave the warriors back. She didn't understand what was happening. She didn't understand why this strong, silent man was carrying her away from her mom and dad. Sun Hawk, feeling her fear, spoke. "Don't be afraid, little one, my sister. Her spirit is crying. You are needed to dry her tears." He tried to explain to her that it was not revenge, but a ritual, the only way to restore the broken balance. His sister, Rainbow, had died of a white man's disease and could not rest until her land was returned. Her spirit, according to Apache beliefs, was tied to this place. He believed that by taking an innocent soul, he could appease his sister's spirit and make it lead. He believed he was restoring balance. Margot, leaving Thomas behind, went out to search on her own. She took her best horse, tied a small knife to her belt, and filled her saddlebag with food. She felt she had to do something, or she would go crazy. She knew she had no chance of catching an experienced warrior, but she couldn't just sit and wait. Her hope was weak, like a thin thread, but she clung to it like a drowning person to a straw. She knew that without her participation, without her maternal love, her daughter would not be able to survive this horror. Along the way, she met an elderly Navajo man who was sitting by a fire and making tea. "You are going after him, white woman?" the old man asked, seeing the despair in her eyes. "After Sun Hawk," Margot nodded. "He did it not out of hatred for you," the Navajo man continued. "He lost his sister. He believes that her spirit is suffering because of your land. He thinks your daughter is the price for her peace." Margot did not understand how one person could so destroy another's life for the sake of his beliefs. This only intensified her anger. Meanwhile, Sheriff Stevens, more experienced and practical, realized that a frontal attack would not work. He gathered a team of the best trackers and local hunters. "That savage won't go far," he said. "He believes his gods will protect him." But he was wrong. Sun Hawk knew these lands like the back of his hand. He knew every trail, every cave, every shadow. He was part of this land. Margot, having traveled a long way, found the tracks of Sun Hawk's horse. They led into a canyon where the wind whistled like a spirit mourning its losses. She left her horse and walked on foot, feeling her heart pound with fear and anticipation. In the depths of the canyon, she saw smoke. She slowly approached the source of the smoke, her body tense like a string. There, by a small fire, sat Sun Hawk. Elizabeth was sleeping on his lap, curled up like a kitten. Margot felt a rush of hatred. She didn't see a human in him, only a barbarian who stole her child. "Give her to me," she screamed, pulling out her knife. Sun Hawk raised his head. He was calm. "I can't," he said. "I cannot betray my sister's memory." Margot rushed at him, but he was too strong, too fast. In an instant, he knocked the knife out of her hand and threw her to the ground. "I beg you, stop," she screamed, but her voice was drowned out by the wind and rage. "I will not harm you," he said, pressing her to the ground. "I just have to do what I have to do." At that moment, through the pain and fear, Margot saw not savagery in his eyes, but sadness. He was not a monster, but a man who had also lost someone. He, too, was experiencing pain. This thought, like lightning, pierced her consciousness, but it didn't weaken her. On the contrary, it made her stronger. He was willing to sacrifice her happiness for his own, for the spirit of his sister, and that was something she could not allow. Margot, despite the physical pain and rage, felt her anger gradually give way to something new. When Sun Hawk, holding her, spoke the words about his sister, she saw in his eyes not savagery, but a deep, unbearable sadness. It was not an act of barbarism, but a desperate attempt to reclaim what he considered his own. His motivation, although insane in her eyes, was as strong as her own. He saw her as the cause of his pain, just as she saw him as the cause of hers. At that very moment, Sheriff Stevens's group burst into the canyon. Thomas was at the front, his face distorted in a grimace of rage. He saw nothing but the desire to avenge his daughter and his humiliation. "Let her go, savage, or I'll kill you," he growled, aiming his rifle at Sunhawk. The warrior let go of Margot, but did not retreat. He pressed Elizabeth to him, shielding her from the muzzles of the rifles. "I beg you, stop," Margot screamed, her voice full of despair. She stood between the two warring sides, her arms outstretched. She understood that any shot could be fatal for everyone, especially for her daughter. "Thomas, please, listen to me," she pleaded, but her husband, blinded by rage, did not hear. He saw only the enemy who had stolen his daughter. At that tense moment, Sunhawk, as if obeying some inner force, loosened his grip. Elizabeth, seeing her mother, broke free and ran to her. The warrior did not stop her. He just watched the girl hug Margot, her spirit. "It didn't leave," Sunhawk whispered, speaking more to himself than to them. "I can't comment. I was wrong." His face was distorted by deep disappointment and pain. He believed that his actions would bring peace to his sister's soul, but instead, he only brought new pain. His ideal of revenge, or rather, of restoring justice, had collapsed. Thomas, seeing his daughter safe, lowered his rifle. The rage in his eyes was replaced by bewilderment. He didn't understand what had happened, but he saw that the warrior was no longer a threat. It was an epiphany for everyone. Hatred was not the answer. Revenge did not bring peace. Sunhawk was broken. He believed in his traditions, in his faith, but they had failed him. He was left alone, surrounded by enemies who could have killed him, but there was no fear in his eyes, only the pain of realizing his own mistake. Sheriff Stevens, seeing that the situation had been resolved without bloodshed, ordered his men to lower their weapons. "'Tis ours, boys. Te'll face justice," he said. But Margot understood that the real trial had already taken place. Sunhawk had sentenced himself to suffering. He had lost his sister, and now, in trying to bring her peace, he had lost a part of himself, realizing the futility of his actions. His act, committed out of love, had turned into destruction, and that was his most terrible punishment. Margot hugged Elizabeth tightly, her heart filling with relief, and tears flowed down her cheeks. She looked at Sunhawk and for the first time saw in him not an enemy, but a person lost in his pain. He was the same as her, only his tragedy had happened earlier and led to terrible consequences. After Elizabeth returned to her mother, the tension in the canyon slowly subsided, but the pain remained. Sunhawk, broken and devastated, waited for his fate. Sheriff Stevens approached him. "Your faith brought you here, Indian. Now you will answer to our laws," he said, reaching for his handcuffs. But Margot, holding the trembling Elizabeth tightly to her, stepped forward. "No, Sheriff," she said firmly, "don't. He has already been punished." She looked at Sunhawk. There was no fear or malice in his eyes, only a deep, all-consuming sadness. He had lost not only his sister, but also his belief that his actions could fix anything. He became a victim of his own beliefs that led him to suffering. Margot, despite the horror of what she had experienced, felt compassion for him. She understood that his pain was just as real as her own. He was a warrior who tried to do a righteous deed, but chose a destructive path. His tragedy was the result of a clash between two worlds, two cultures that could not understand each other. Margot turned to Thomas. He lost his sister. His land was taken. He believed that our lives were the price for his peace, she said. Thomas, although he had been full of hatred just a few minutes ago, now looked at Sunhawk with surprise. He saw not a savage, but a man broken by grief. Sheriff Stevens, puzzled, lowered his hand with the handcuffs. He looked at the faces of Margot and Thomas, who had gone through hell and returned with an understanding he could not comprehend. For the first time, they saw in their enemy a person who, like them, was simply trying to protect what he loved. Sunhawk, seeing that he would not be judged, stood up. He bowed to Margot, and then walked away into the canyon, leaving them alone. "Why did you do that, Margot?" Thomas asked. "Because I realized that his pain is no less than ours. We cannot heal our pain by causing pain to others. We must accept what happened and move on." Their house was destroyed. Their lives were turned upside down. But on that day, they did not just get their daughter back. They gained an epiphany. They realized that revenge and hatred do not bring peace, but only create a new cycle of pain. Only reconciliation with what happened, and the ability to forgive, can give hope. Conclusion and lesson. This story, set in the Wild West, reminds us of how easy it is to be blinded by our own pain. We often look at others as enemies, without trying to understand their motives. Today, in a world where conflicts arise at every turn, this lesson is especially relevant. We must learn to see not only enemies in others, but also people who have their own tragedies. Forgiveness and compassion, even to those who have hurt us, is the only path to true liberation and peace. Like Margot, we must learn to stop this cycle of hatred in order to find peace.